Welcome to the alignment and weight setting training for maintenance of DMF 1630 rail gear. This video will show the proper procedure to align and set the rail wheel weights on a set of 1630 rail gear. This same procedure can also be used for 1019, 1212, and 1420 gear. Inspect the condition of each tire and replace worn or damaged tires as needed. Inflate the tires as recommended by the tire and wheel manufacturers. Inspect the condition of each rail wheel using the wheel wear gauge DMF part number 800-115. Replace worn or damaged wheels as needed. Park the truck on straight and level track with the rail gear deployed and pinned off. If track is not available, park on level ground with 3-inch wide channel or tubing under the rail wheels and truck tires to simulate being on rail. The DMF Alignment Bar Kit, part number 800-950, is recommended to help provide accurate alignment measurements. Push the alignment bar against the rail wheel flanges. Then use the thumb screws to tighten the pin blocks against the backside of each rail wheel. The first step is to measure the length and cross between the rear truck tires and the rear rail wheels. This ensures that the rail gear is aligned to the truck tires to propel the vehicle straight down the track. It's often difficult to find a symmetric point on both sides of the truck rear axle to take measurements from. One option is to use a framing square to mark a measurement spot on both inner dual wheels. The marks need to be the same height off the rail on both sides of the truck and at the rear edge of the wheel bead. Choose a height that allows direct line of sight with the alignment pins on both sides of the rear rail gear. Measure and record dimensions A1 and A2 as shown. Length A1 and A2 must equal each other within 1/8 of an inch. Measure and record dimensions B1 and B2 as shown. Cross measurements B1 and B2 must equal each other within 1/4 of an inch. An alternate method to get length measurements A1 and A2 is to use a level and framing square to mark a consistent fore-aft position on each side of the truck relative to the rear axle. For trucks with a tandem axle, mark and then measure to the tandem center line. If these measurements are not in spec, there may be worn or broken components on the rail gear or truck suspension. Check those problem areas carefully, and then contact DMF for further instructions before moving the rear rail gear. If any adjustments or repairs have been made, check the rear rail gear to rear truck tire alignment again to ensure the alignment is now correct. The rear rail gear alignment must be completed before working on the front rail gear alignment. Once the rear rail gear alignment is complete, measure and record dimensions C1, C2, D1, and D2. Length C1 and C2 must equal each other within 1/8 of an inch. Cross measurements D1 and D2 must equal each other within 1/4 of an inch. Minor adjustments to the front rail gear alignment can be achieved by installing shims between the long arm and the stop block on the pivot arm. Use matching shim thickness for both pivot arms on the same side of the truck. The maximum allowed shim thickness for this position is 1/4 of an inch. After installing shims, check to ensure that all 4 pivot arms are seated against the long arm. If pivot arm shims cannot correct the rail gear alignment, then the front axle tubes must be ground free from the pivot arms to enable sliding it left or right on the truck. You may find it's more economical to replace the 2 pivot arms and axle tubes instead of grinding them loose. In some rare instances, the front cross tubes may also have to be repositioned to correct problems with length measurements C1 and C2. Find a common point on both sides of the truck to measure and help narrow down the problem. See the installation section of the railgear manual for more details if this solution is required. In this instance, the gear may not have been originally installed correctly. Once all adjustments have been made, check the front rail gear to rear rail gear alignment again to ensure it is now correct. Set both front brakes at a 5-degree forward angle. This will maximize ground clearance when the rail gear is stowed for highway travel. Then tack weld the inboard edge of each outboard pivot arm to the axle tube. These tack welds will hold it in place while the weight setting and rail testing are being performed. The weight distribution between the rear rail gear and rear truck tires must be adjusted to ensure adequate braking effort can be applied. Improper weight settings could also cause excessive tire wear or improper loading of the rail gear axle. The rail wheel load can be adjusted by adding or removing spacers between the rail gear and the truck frame. Only use solid steel spacers. Never use hollow tubing in this location. Some trucks have air suspension for the rear axle. On those vehicles, the weight can typically be adjusted with an air regulator instead of shims. Visual inspection of the tire deflection can be used to adjust the rail gear load. Minimal tire deflection over the rail means the tires do not have enough load on them. Excessive tire deflection over the rail indicates that too much load is on the truck tires. Add or remove spacers from the rear rail gear as needed to achieve the correct tire deflection. After the alignment and weight adjustments are completed and necessary components are tacked in place, the vehicle needs to be rail tested. Drive one direction only before checking rail wheel wear. Then, if possible, run the vehicle forward and backward as well as through curves and switches. Note any abnormal rail wheel wear or excessive flanging. Test the brakes to ensure safe stopping distances can be achieved. If any issues are found, adjust the alignment or weights as needed. Once all adjustments and testing have been completed, the front axle tubes can be structurally welded to the outer pivot arms. This needs to be performed with the rail gear deployed. Run a weld bead all the way around the inboard face of each outboard pivot arm. Do not weld the inboard pivot arms to the axle tube. This would prevent servicing the hydraulic cylinders in the future if needed. Fully weld any front pivot arm shims in place. If the front cross tubes were moved during the alignment, fully weld them to the truck frame. Ensure that all of the spacers are fully seated against the rear rail gear bracket and the truck frame. Then weld the back edge of each spacer to the rail gear and to each other. Do not weld the top spacer to the truck frame. Run a 2-inch weld along the top edge of the 4-hole plate of the rear rail gear where it meets the rear frame bracket. Then perform the same operation to the plate on the opposite side of the truck. The alignment and weight setting procedure is now complete. Thank you for watching. Keep a completed copy of the alignment sheet inside the truck once work is finished. Please visit www.dmfatlanta.com for additional information.